Hey guys, what's up? This is Stock Retail coming back to you. By now, maybe you've seen the announcement on Adam's latest stock option vesting. And so I just want to go through that and talk about, is he hodling? Is he paper handing? What's going on with that? Just as a quick little bit of context into what I'm going to go through here. I myself used to work at a level at kind of a larger company. It was actually one of the Dow Jones 30 companies currently. And I was high enough that I did have some stock options myself, just kind of a mid-level executive there. And so I know a little bit about stock options, kind of the difference between RSOs, RSUs, and some things like that. So I'll be able to talk about that a little bit today. And what I'm going to do is, for those who just want sort of the TLDR, I will hit the highlights, the summary pretty quickly. In fact, here's what I'm going to go through. I'll get right to the point. And then I'm going to do a little bit of detailed walk through the filing for those of you who want to understand a little more. I'll show you the actual filing itself, talk through what that's telling us, and then I'll provide the links. I'm not a trust me bro kind of person. I won't go too deep today into kind of the mechanics of how this all works. I might do that in the future because we tend to get trolled a little bit on these, and it's good to understand what's going on and how these work. But I'll still hit a few what I consider kind of important details. So let's just dive in. First off, if you look before these options even hit, and just think of these as grants. So you've heard him say most of his pay, I think it's like 2/3, comes in the form of stock options. So he's not even getting a paycheck for this amount month to month. And so that's why it's kind of a bigger deal and why he highlights it and wants us to understand his compensation is heavily tied to the performance of the company, which I frankly like. It means he's invested in the future performance of our company that we own. So previously, he already held, coming into this year, about 794,000 AMC shares and 794,000 APE. So first off, right there, think about all the times you've seen our detractors talking about him selling and insiders not owning and all of that. He came into the year owning almost 1.6 million combined shares. So that's, kind of interesting to know right there, and maybe some anti-FUD as well. So on top of that, then he just vested in about a 500,000 shares each. Now, what does vesting mean? So when you get a stock option, let's say I received one today. It's my company saying, hey, in the future, if you stick around and if you do a good enough job, we're going to give you these shares as part of your compensation package. And so, but they don't give them to you all at once. So in my case, the company I worked for, it was a 4-year vesting schedule. So every year after, so like 1 year from now, I'd get a quarter of that grant. And then in 2 years, I'd get the next quarter. It would take me 4 years to get all the shares. It's kind of a long-term incentive, so they get executives focused out farther. And then frankly, I'm just going to be real, it's a way that companies get their hooks into you also, because if some other company comes calling, now you've got all these unvested shares and you're like, man, if I leave, I'm not going to get these. So it's a way both of incentivizing leaders, but also trying to keep them. And so when I say vesting, so what you can see here is he had 3 different stock years. He's getting his in thirds. I mentioned I used to get mine in quarters. So it takes him 3 years to get each grant, is what I'm saying. So for 2020, he got the last batch of those. Those are done now. He got 148,000 each of AMC and APE. And then for 2021, you can see he got a little over 300K each. And for 2022, he got about 90K each. But then he withheld some for taxes. So here we need to pause and just talk a little bit about how RSUs work, restricted stock units. This is a type of grant that he has. Basically, what it means is, as a paycheck, kind of in lieu of a paycheck, he gets this dump of shares. So that's the middle box here. Those are the shares he just got, these each kind of amounts in AMC and APE. Well, the IRS kind of says, hey, I don't want you to sort of skirt around paying your income taxes by just having your company give you a bunch of stock. And then you could sell that stock and have that money, and now you skipped income taxes. So the IRS says, okay, for these RSUs, I'm going to treat those like you received that cash at the time you got them, basically at the value of the shares. And in fact, RSUs are usually granted at a value, which is why he got so many shares for now, because when they were granted at some cash value, and so then at the time they get exercised, you have to get enough shares to meet that value. But then, because you received those, so the IRS says, all right, you owe taxes now. And so a lot of times executives will sell a piece of the shares so they don't have to pay the taxes out of pocket. Because if you don't pay from the shares, then you're going to have to dip into your own bank account to pay those taxes. So that's why you often see the AMC guys, when they receive these RSUs, you'll see a piece of them got sold. And you'll get trolled. You'll see tweets saying, look at, he sold these 251,000, but let's focus also on what he kept, and we will talk about that. So he covered his taxes. That's this 251K AMC that withheld. Think of it more as withheld. He just kind of almost never got him. Okay, so then the current ownership, so what he brought in and then what he kept, brings him now to 2.4 million shares. So you can see he's got about 1.1 million AMC he's holding, and then about 1.3 million APE. And I will go through the details again on that for those who want to stick around. So, but then he's got future grants as well that he has not received yet. So I mentioned there's this vesting schedule. So he's got a whole bunch he hasn't vested in, and he's going to have to stick around for those. So these service grants, that is basically saying if he's still employed at the time that these come due, then he gets to have these. So that's his incentive to stick around. But he's also got performance grants. So these will be like AMC has to hit certain profitability targets, or maybe certain cash generating targets, whatever that is. I don't have access to that, but he's got performance targets that sort of guarantee you and I as shareholders see him be incentivized, that he can't just get them because he stayed. He can't pull a George Costanza from Seinfeld and nap under his desk and get all his shares. So he's got these other 2.1 million shares that he only gets if AMC hits performance targets set by the board. So then the total of what he currently owns plus what he could get in the future is this 5.5 million. You might have seen his tweet. He said basically 3 million. So that's, you can just see right now, if you look at his current ownership here, plus if he sticks around grants, that's basically the 3+ million. But then I'm saying there's another 2.1 he didn't even really mention in his tweet if AMC hits those performance targets. So his total current and future incentive is 5.5 million shares. I just want to pause on that and underline that. So just think of, if you had 5.5 million shares and you had some authority to help drive the future of AMC, would you or would you not want AMC to succeed? So that right there, I think, ought to be in your mind when you see people talking about maybe him being in the pocket of bad guys and all that stuff. I think it's a bunch of baloney, because you see right here, if you had 5.5 million combined AMC and APE shares, I'd like to think you would be happy if those went up. That's a whole lot of motivation right there. So let's just summarize this a little differently, just kind of come up. So what happened? We mentioned he received basically that 500,000 each of AMC and APE. He kept 77% of his grants, so he just sold that little bit to cover the tax hit. Interestingly, if you noticed, I went kind of fast. He only sold AMC to cover the tax hit, so take that for what you will. He kept all of his APE this time. He kept his previously owned about 1.6 million shares. And by the way, note, that means since APE has been created, he hasn't sold any APE. I find that pretty interesting as well. So take that for what it's worth. And then now he owns the 1.1 million AMC and the 1.3 million APE, with that other 3.1 million possible grants for the 5.5 million total share. And I just want to do a little trolling of my own. But what about insiders, bruh? So, kind of inside joke. Basically, you're going to see trolls, but just go back to them with all of this. Screenshot this or something, save it for yourself. He's got 5.5 million total shares possible, and the 2.4 he's sitting on now, and never sold any APE. Not to mention the tweet where he told us he's going to hold this stuff. All right, so that's the high level. I'm going to click into the details here. So here's the actual filing. Again, I've got this kind of linked at the end. You'll be able to kind of, screenshot that and use that link. Too bad YouTube doesn't have kind of hyperlinks. And I'm going to actually go through kind of everything you see on the screen, and then there's kind of another screen I'm going to go through in a minute. So even got a couple DMs from some of you asking some questions on this, so hopefully those will get answered. So first, let's go through the footnotes, the little green text you see. And I've got a screenshot of all the footnotes later in this as well, so you'll see that in a minute. But so first on that first line, line 1, you can see there's that little 1, 2, 3. So those are where I knew he had his options granted from 2020, 2021, and 2022. And so those were all just kind of partially vested. And then on line 2, you can see that, so that little number 4, the green little number 4, that some shares were withheld. That's where I know that those were withheld for taxes. There's a few other clues that tell me what that was here, and I'm going to go through those. But you can see then later on the line, so see this D where it says they were disposed. That just means basically sold. I don't really think of it as he sold. I'm calling it withheld, as you've been hearing me say. The IRS just needs that transaction for all his tax purposes. So the way it really looks to the IRS is, the shares went in his hand and then immediately went back to kind of cover the taxes. But that's reported as disposing. So it's basically like an insider sale. So he received kind of this is, by the way, I'm just looking at the AMC shares. I should have mentioned that. This page here, I'm only talking AMC shares. So you got the 554 we talked about, and then 250 of those. He said, well, I guess I'm not going to really take those because I want those to cover taxes. Okay, and then he kept all his ape. We'll talk about that more. So on line 1 also, then you can look at box 4. I kind of talked about some of that. Excuse me. And for each year, I already mentioned he gets a third per year, and so I kind of already talked through that, so I'll skip forward. The codes, so in box 3, you can see this code on line 1, this M, and then on line 2, this F. So the M means he's converting some of those RSUs, those grants. So he's turning those into, instead of them being an option, that's why these are called stock options. And by the way, I should have mentioned at the beginning, I'm sure you've realized by now, these are very, very different from the options we trade. These are not, contracts that we're buying and selling. These are an option for him to receive his payment, essentially. So anyway, the M is, he said, all right, I'm converting these RSUs, these restricted stock units, and then the F is specific coding for the IRS about the being withheld for taxes. That's one of those clues I mentioned that I had that tell me what happened. Some of you have also asked why this $0 on the price over here. So that's exactly that tax math that I was telling you about. So the IRS looks at this as you didn't pay for these, you only received them. So that's why this price is 0, because that's why they're called grants too. A grant, another word for grant is a gift. He was given these as part of his compensation, so he did not himself buy them. So his cost basis for the IRS is 0, which is why you get that tax hit. All of the value of these is considered profit, and any future sale he has on these, is all profit as well because it was his income. Just think of it as if you got a paycheck that if you held your paycheck, somehow it had the option to sort of grow in the future because it was stock that could go up. That's basically what this is. Okay, and then box 4 we kind of already talked about. A means acquired, purchased, or in this case given. D is disposed or sold. And so this D here is just he didn't keep that piece. We've talked about that quite a bit already. And then finally, box 6, this D means direct ownership. You can see D for direct or I for indirect. And by the way, again, so there's no trust me, I'm giving you the codes to these later. I screenshot them. I put them in here. I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so this D direct just means these shares are sitting in his account. He now has them in some kind of brokerage account or bank account or whatever. They're in his name. That's what the D for direct means. Nobody else is holding them for him. Okay, so there was another page with a lot more detail, and what you see on this page is essentially, you'll see kind of 3 repeating lines. So see this 148, 316, 89.7, and then you see again 148, 316, 89.7. So there's basically 3 lines kind of for AMC, 3 lines for APE, and then finally you've got a line down here for just how much of his APE he still owns. And so there were 3 grants I mentioned, and so we're just really repeating. That's why I wanted to start with that summary at the beginning. The 3 grants for 2021 and 22, so you can see those. And so here's your footnotes, right? There's that 1, 2, 3, and then same here. And then finally, that amount he's holding in his APE. So not too much here, just it's basically telling you how I got to, let me go back, all of this. Okay, so if you want to go through that later, you can just see the proof. And again, I'm giving you the link for how these numbers work. There are the footnotes. Screenshot that if you like. But again, I'll give you the link. You can go get it. The codes for all of this stuff. So there are 2 different documents. There's basically, and let me go back. Actually, I'll show you. You can see somewhere here, instruction 8. So like this tells you how to even fill this thing out. So what I found is a document on some of the instructions, and I found the codes straight from the SEC website. So you can kind of go double check that. And there's some more transaction codes for you. You can see it starts to be pretty boring stuff. That's why the summary is what really mattered to me. And then the links. So that's kind of it. Let's just finish out on that summary one more time. He received 500,000 shares each. He kept, 3/4 of it, more than 3/4 of it. The only part he withheld for taxes was AMC. About half the AMC he got. Kept all his APE. It kind of tells me also he's never sold any APE. He had carried in this 793 each. Now he owns over 2.4 million combined shares, and he's exposed to another 3.1 million shares of future grants. So, sounds to me like he's a HODLer. HODLer, however you say it. I think there's a reason he told us he rides with us. So hashtag I ride with you. Let's go, apes.